Your ex-wife is in labor and the baby is coming.
What? Where is she now?
No one called him at this hour unless someone was about to die. He was Seoul's most dangerous man, a mafia boss whose empire stretched from the Han River to the docks of Busan. His phone rang at 3 in the morning, cutting through the silence of his penthouse like a blade. Kang Minho didn't move at first, just stared at the unknown number glowing on the screen, his jaw tight with the kind of control that came from years of making enemies fear his name. But when he answered, the voice on the other end wasn't one of his men. It was a woman, breathless and afraid, speaking English with a desperation that made something long dormant crack open in his chest. "Is this Kang Minho? Please, I need you to come. She's in labor. Your ex-wife. The baby is coming." 8 months ago, he had signed divorce papers and watched the only woman he'd ever loved walk out of his life. Now she was calling him back from the edge of oblivion, and he knew with absolute certainty that nothing would stop him from reaching her. Not his enemies, not his pride, not even the lies they'd both believed. Welcome to K-fairytales stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Minho was already moving before his mind caught up to his body. He grabbed his keys, his phone, his gun because a man in his position never left home unarmed, and he was out the door before the woman on the line finished giving him the address. His driver appeared from the shadows, always present, always ready, and Minho barked directions as he slid into the back of the black Mercedes that had carried him through 1,000 deals and twice as many threats. Seoul General Hospital, private wing. Now. His driver knew better than to ask questions when Minho's voice carried that particular edge of desperation, wrapped in steel. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow. Minho's hands were steady on his knees, but his heart was a war drum beating against his ribs. Amara, his wife, ex-wife, the woman whose absence had carved a hole in his chest so deep he'd stopped believing it could ever heal. She was in labor, with his child. A child he hadn't known existed until 3 minutes ago when a stranger's voice shattered his carefully constructed walls. 8 months of silence. 8 months of pretending he didn't dream about her every night. 8 months of telling himself she was better off without the darkness he brought into every room. All of it meaningless now because she needed him and nothing else in the world mattered. The hospital loomed ahead, all glass and steel and sterile efficiency. Minho was out of the car before it fully stopped, moving through the automatic doors with the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. The night staff recognized him instantly. Everyone in Seoul knew Kang Minho's face, knew what he was capable of, knew that crossing him meant disappearing without a trace. The receptionist's hands trembled as she pulled up the records, her eyes darting between her screen and his face like she was afraid looking too long might turn her to stone. Amara Wells, labor and delivery. 3rd floor, room 317. The words barely registered before Minho was moving again, taking the stairs because the elevator would be too slow, his expensive shoes silent on the polished concrete. His mind raced with questions he had no answers for. Why hadn't she told him? How long had she known? Did she hate him so much that she'd planned to raise his child alone, erasing him from their lives completely? The thought made something violent surge through him, made his hands curl into fists at his sides. He reached the 3rd floor and forced himself to slow down, to breathe, to remember that walking into that room like a storm would only terrify her. The hallway was quiet, just the soft beep of monitors and the distant sound of a baby crying somewhere. Room 317. He could see through the small window in the door. Amara was there, bent over in obvious pain, one hand gripping the bed rail while another woman, black like her with kind eyes and worried features, rubbed her back and murmured encouragement. The sight of Amara hurting made every protective instinct he tried to kill come roaring back to life with the force of a freight train. Minho pushed open the door. Both women turned, and the look on Amara's face when she saw him was everything. Shock and relief and something that looked dangerously like hope, all mixed together in those dark eyes he'd memorized years ago when he'd still believed in forever. She was more beautiful than he remembered. Her natural hair was pulled back from her face, her brown skin glowing despite the pain, her curves fuller now with pregnancy. She wore a hospital gown that did nothing to diminish her radiance, and Minho felt his breath catch because 8 months apart had done nothing to diminish the hold she had on his heart. "Minho," She breathed his name like a prayer and a question all at once. You came. The disbelief in her voice cut deeper than any knife because of course he came. Did she really think there was anything in this world that could have kept him away? You called, he said simply, moving to her side like gravity itself was pulling him there, like his body remembered the way even when his mind had tried to forget. Did you think I wouldn't? His voice was rougher than he intended, betraying emotions he'd locked away for 8 months. Another contraction hit her and stole whatever response she might have given. Minho watched her face contort with pain he couldn't fix, couldn't threaten away, couldn't eliminate with money or power or violence. The other woman, her friend, stepped back to give them space, and Minho found himself doing something he hadn't done in 8 months. He touched her. His hand came to rest on her lower back, where he knew the pain centered, applying pressure the way he remembered from the pregnancy books he'd secretly read before their marriage fell apart, before the lies and accusations destroyed everything they'd built. Breathe, he murmured in Korean, then switched to English for her benefit. Like we practiced. Remember, it was a lie. They'd never practiced. They'd barely made it past the first trimester before his world had exploded around them, before doctored photographs and paid witnesses had convinced Amara he'd been unfaithful, before she'd walked away with divorce papers and a shattered heart. But the lie felt right in this moment, felt like the future they should have had, the one he was determined to reclaim no matter what it cost. Amara's laugh was breathless and broken. We never practiced. We barely made it past the first trimester before everything went wrong. The reminder of their broken marriage hung between them like smoke, but Minho pushed it aside because the past could wait. Right now his wife, former wife, the mother of his child, needed him to be present, to be strong. To be everything he'd failed to be when she'd needed him most. Her friend stepped forward, introducing herself as Selene, Amara's roommate and closest friend. She studied Minho with suspicious eyes, clearly protective, clearly unsure whether his presence was help or harm. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of pain and presence. Minho stayed at Amara's side through every contraction, every moment of fear, every second she gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. He welcomed the pain because it was nothing compared to what she was enduring, nothing compared to the 8 months he'd spent in a hell of his own making. Selene hovered nearby with water and encouraging words, but it was Minho that Amara kept looking at, kept reaching for, kept needing in ways that made his chest tight with emotions he'd buried under years of violence and power. When the doctor finally arrived, a calm woman with efficient movements and a no-nonsense expression, she took one look at Minho and Amara and asked the question that would change everything. Father. Her tone was professional, but her eyes were sharp, already cataloging the tension between them. The way Amara's hand clutched his like a lifeline, the way Minho's jaw was set with the kind of determination that suggested he'd fight anyone who tried to remove him from this room. Yes, Minho said before Amara could answer, his tone brooking no argument. I'm the father. Amara's eyes found his, wide and questioning, searching his face for something he hoped she could see. The truth, the regret, the desperate need to be part of this, part of her life, part of their child's future. She didn't contradict him. The doctor nodded, satisfied, and began her examination while Minho held Amara's hand and pretended his world wasn't tilting off its axis with every breath she took. The doctor's expression grew serious as she worked, her brow furrowing slightly. The baby's heart rate is dropping, she said calmly but firmly. We need to prep for an emergency cesarean section. Now. The words hit Minho like bullets. Amara's hand tightened around his, her eyes filling with tears. Is the baby okay? Will my baby be okay? The fear in her voice made Minho want to destroy something, made him want to tear down the walls until he found a way to fix this, to make the universe bend to his will the way everything else in his life did. But this wasn't his world. This was medicine and biology and things he couldn't control no matter how much power he wielded. The doctor squeezed Amara's shoulder reassuringly. We're going to take excellent care of both of you. Dad, you'll need to wait outside. No, the word came out flat and absolute. Minho's hand tightened around Amara's. I'm not leaving her. The doctor opened her mouth to argue, but something in Minho's expression made her reconsider. She'd worked in this hospital long enough to recognize power when she saw it, to know when a battle wasn't worth fighting. Fine. You can scrub in, but you follow my rules or you're out. Understood. Minho nodded once, already moving to wash his hands, to put on the sterile gown and mask, to do whatever was necessary to stay by Amara's side. The operating room was cold and bright and terrifying in its efficiency. Amara was awake but groggy from the epidural, her eyes tracking Minho's every movement like he was her anchor in a storm. He positioned himself by her head, one hand holding hers, the other stroking her hair with a gentleness that would have shocked anyone who knew him in his other life. "I'm here," he murmured against her temple. "I'm not going anywhere. You're going to be fine. Our baby is going to be fine. I promise." It was a promise he had no right to make, a promise that defied logic and medicine and fate itself. But he meant every word. The surgery happened behind a sterile drape that blocked Amara's view. Minho watched the doctor work with steady hands, watched her make the incision, watched her reach in and lift out a tiny, perfect, screaming human being. A girl. His daughter. The doctor held her up briefly before whisking her to the warming table where nurses suctioned her airway and wiped her down and performed all the mysterious rituals of newborn care. Minho couldn't look away. She was so small, so impossibly fragile, with dark skin and a full head of black hair and lungs that worked perfectly if her furious crying was any indication. "She's beautiful," Amara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Minho, she's so beautiful," he couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, his chest too full of emotions he didn't have names for. Beautiful was inadequate. She was a miracle. A piece of him and Amara made flesh, proof that love could create something pure even when everything else was broken. The nurses finished their assessment and brought the baby over, placing her carefully on Amara's chest for skin-to-skin contact. Amara's hands came up to cradle their daughter, and Minho watched his entire world reshape itself around this moment. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, the nurse announced. Perfectly healthy despite the dramatic entrance. "What's her name?" Minho looked at Amara. They'd never discussed names. They'd never discussed anything because she'd been pregnant and alone and keeping it from him for reasons he still didn't understand. Amara's eyes met his over their daughter's head. "Naomi," she said softly, "after my grandmother. Naomi Kang." Minho's heart stopped at the sound of his last name attached to his daughter. Amara hadn't changed it, hadn't stripped away that connection even in divorce. "Naomi Kang," he repeated, testing the words, feeling them settle into his bones. "It's perfect. She's perfect." Later, after the surgery was complete and Amara had been moved to recovery, after the initial chaos had settled into the quiet hum of monitors and distant hospital sounds, Minho stood by the window holding his daughter while Amara slept. Naomi was wrapped in a pink blanket, her tiny face peaceful now that the trauma of birth had passed. She was so small in his arms, so vulnerable, so dependent on him for protection. Minho had held weapons and signed death warrants and built an empire on violence, but holding his daughter was the most terrifying thing he'd ever done. "You're going to have everything," he whispered to her in Korean. "Everything I never had. Love and safety and a father who would burn the world down to keep you safe. No one will ever hurt you. No one will ever make you feel less than the miracle you are. I promise you that." Naomi's tiny hand found his finger and wrapped around it with surprising strength, and Minho felt something inside him shatter and reform all at once. He'd thought his heart was made of stone, hardened by years of violence and betrayal and loss. But this small being had cracked it wide open, and he knew he would never be the same. Amara stirred in the bed behind him. Minho turned to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're good with her," she said quietly. "Natural." Minho crossed to the bed and carefully transferred Naomi to her mother's arms, watching as Amara's face softened with a love so pure it hurt to witness. "I've had 8 months to prepare," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. 8 months to read every book, take every class, imagine every scenario. But you just walked in and knew exactly what to do. How is that possible? "Because she's mine," Minho said simply. "Ours. And I spent 8 months imagining a future I thought I'd never have. When I read those pregnancy books before the divorce, it wasn't curiosity. It was hope. Hope that someday we'd fix what was broken and I'd get to be the father I should have been from the start." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't know. How could you have known when I didn't tell you?" The guilt in her voice made Minho sit on the edge of her bed, careful not to jostle her or the baby. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the question that had been eating at him since the moment he'd learned about Naomi's existence. 8 months, Amara. You carried our child for 8 months and never once reached out. Did you hate me so much that you wanted to erase me from her life completely? The pain in his voice was raw, unfiltered, the kind of vulnerability he never showed anyone. But this was Amara. She'd always been able to see through his armor, to find the broken places he tried to hide. I didn't know how to tell you, Amara said, her free hand reaching for his. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I signed the divorce papers. 2 weeks after I'd convinced myself that you'd cheated, that you'd destroyed everything we built, that staying away from you was the only way to survive. And then suddenly there was this baby, this piece of you growing inside me, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call you immediately. But the other part, the part that was still broken and bleeding, that part was terrified you'd reject us both. Minho's jaw tightened. I would never reject my child. Never. Even if you'd told me in the middle of signing those papers, even if you'd thrown it in my face as a weapon, I would have fought for this baby. For you, for us. Amara's tears fell faster now, silent tracks down her cheeks. I know that now. But then, in those first few weeks, I was so angry and hurt and confused. And by the time I'd worked through enough of it to consider reaching out, too much time had passed. I convinced myself you'd moved on, that you were better off without the complication of a child you never planned for. Moved on? Minho's laugh was bitter. I haven't moved on, Amara. I haven't touched another woman, haven't looked at another woman, haven't wanted anything except the chance to prove those photos were lies, and that woman was paid to destroy us. 8 months of hell because the only person I've ever wanted was you and you were gone, and I didn't know how to get you back. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. There is no moving on from you. There's only enduring, until you come back. Amara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. Sorry I let fear and pride keep Naomi from her father. Sorry for everything that went wrong between us. Minho kissed her forehead gently, mindful of her exhaustion and pain. We'll fix it, all of it. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're going to fix this because I'm not losing you again. I'm not losing her. His eyes dropped to Naomi, sleeping peacefully in Amara's arms. You're both mine, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. A knock on the door interrupted them. Selene entered with coffee and a knowing look that suggested she'd been giving them privacy deliberately. She set the cups down and studied Minho with less suspicion than before. You're really going to stick around? She asked bluntly. Because Amara has been through hell, and if you're just going to disappear when things get complicated, it would be better if you left now before Naomi gets attached. Minho met her challenging gaze without flinching. I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. This is my family, and I'm going to take care of them. Selene's expression softened slightly. Good. Because that little girl deserves a father who shows up, and Amara deserves someone who fights for her instead of letting misunderstandings destroy everything. She picked up her jacket. I'm going to get some sleep, but I'll be back in a few hours. Try not to make any more bobbies while I'm gone. The comment made Amara choke on a laugh despite her exhaustion. Selene winked and left, closing the door softly behind her. The room fell into comfortable silence, just the three of them breathing in sync. The next morning brought complications beyond the emotional weight of their reunion. Minho was dozing in the chair beside Amara's bed, his body too large for the furniture but unwilling to leave, when his phone vibrated with a message from his second-in-command. 3 words. Urgent. Office. Now. Minho looked at Amara, still sleeping peacefully with Naomi in the bassinet beside her, and made a decision. He wasn't leaving. Whatever crisis had erupted in his absence could wait, or his men could handle it themselves. For the first time in his career, his empire took second place to something more important. But the universe had other plans. His phone rang and the name on the screen made his jaw tighten. Young Taeyong, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who'd been running operations while Minho was at the hospital. Boss, we have a problem. The words were clipped, urgent, carrying the kind of tension that meant someone was about to die. Minho stood and moved to the hallway, pulling the door closed softly so as not to wake Amara. Talk. There's been chatter, Taeyong said. Your rivals know you're distracted. They're planning something. I don't have details yet, but the timing is suspicious. Right after you disappear for a night to be with your ex-wife. How do they know where I am? Minho's voice was cold, dangerous, the voice that made grown men flinch. Someone talked. We're investigating, but in the meantime, you need to secure your position. They see weakness and they're going to strike. Minho's mind raced through options, through scenarios, through the careful calculations that had kept him alive and in power for 15 years. He couldn't leave Amara and Naomi vulnerable. But he also couldn't let his empire crumble because he was distracted by personal matters. Double security at the hospital. No one gets on this floor without clearance. And send Youngmin to me, now. Youngmin arrived 20 minutes later, a compact woman in her 40s with the kind of efficiency that came from years working in Minho's organization. She'd been his head of security for a decade, had saved his life twice, and was one of the few people he trusted completely. "Boss," she said by way of greeting, her eyes scanning the hospital hallway with professional assessment. "We have a situation." "Tell me something I don't know," Minho muttered. "What's the intel? 3 different organizations are positioning for a move against your territory. They think you're vulnerable because of the divorce, because you've been erratic lately." "I haven't been erratic. I've been grieving. There's a difference." Youngmin's expression softened slightly. "I know, but they don't see it that way. They see opportunity. And there's something else." She hesitated, which was unusual. Youngmin never hesitated. One of the organizations is being led by someone with a personal grudge. Someone who knew about Amara, who might have been involved in orchestrating the photos that destroyed your marriage. Minho went very still, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "Who?" "Lee Sunwoo, your former business partner, the man you cut out 5 years ago for skimming profits." Minho's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Sunwoo. He should have killed him when he had the chance instead of showing mercy, instead of simply removing him from the organization and letting him walk away. Now that mercy was coming back to haunt him. What's his play?" Youngmin pulled up security footage on her phone. "He's been meeting with Amara's ex-boyfriend, the one from before you married her. They've been planning something together, something that involves her." Minho's vision went red at the edges. He'd known about Amara's ex, a man named Marcus Chen who treated her badly enough that she'd fled the relationship and ended up crossing paths with Minho. Marcus had tried to contact her several times after their marriage, had made veiled threats about exposing secrets that would ruin her reputation. Minho had dealt with him swiftly and efficiently, or so he'd thought. Apparently, Marcus had found new allies and a new reason to seek revenge. "Get me everything on Marcus Chen and Lee Sunwoo. Every communication, every movement, every person they've contacted. And Youngmin," his voice was deadly calm, "I want them alive. For now." Youngmin nodded and disappeared to make the arrangements. Minho returned to Amara's room to find her awake and nursing Naomi, her face soft with maternal love. She looked up when he entered and her expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong? You have your business face on. The one that means someone's about to have a very bad day." Minho sat beside her on the bed, careful not to disturb the baby. "There's been a threat. Against me, against my organization, and possibly against you and Naomi. I need to move you somewhere safer than this hospital." Fear flashed across Amara's face, but she held his gaze steadily. "Who? Why would anyone target us? We're divorced. I'm not part of your world anymore. You're the mother of my child," Minho said gently. "That makes you part of my world forever. And there are people who would use you to hurt me, who would threaten Naomi to force my hand in business dealings. I won't let that happen. We're leaving within the hour. I have a place prepared, somewhere secure, somewhere they can't find you." Amara's hand tightened around Naomi instinctively. "What about my apartment? My things? Selene. Everything will be taken care of. Selene can come with us if she wants, or I'll arrange protection for her separately. But Amara, this isn't negotiable. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen because your safety, Naomi's safety, is the only thing that matters right now." His voice softened. "I know you're scared. I know you don't want to be dragged back into this life. But please, trust me one more time. Let me protect you." The desperation in his voice, the raw fear underneath his controlled exterior, was what convinced her. She nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll go. But Minho, you have to promise me something. Promise me you're not going to do anything that puts you in danger. Naomi needs her father. I need you." The confession hung between them, heavy with meaning. Minho cupped her face with both hands and kissed her forehead. "I promise. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to get through this together, and when it's over, we're going to fix our marriage and raise our daughter and be the family we should have been from the start." He pulled back to look in her eyes. I love you, Amara. I never stopped loving you. I should have said it 8 months ago. Should have fought harder, should have made you believe me. But I'm saying it now. I love you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it. Amara's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. God help me, I never stopped. Even when I hated you, even when I thought you'd betrayed me, even when I was signing divorce papers and telling myself I'd be better off alone. I loved you through all of it. Minho kissed her then, carefully because she was still recovering from surgery, but with enough intensity to leave no doubt about his feelings. When they broke apart, Naomi had finished nursing and was staring up at them with dark eyes that seemed impossibly wise for someone only hours old. She has your eyes, Amara said softly, stroking their daughter's cheek, and your stubbornness if the way she fought her way into the world is any indication. Minho smiled, a rare genuine expression that transformed his usually hard features. Then she's going to be unstoppable. His phone buzzed again. The car's ready. Youngmin is coordinating the move. Are you able to walk or should I carry you? Amara assessed her body honestly. I can walk with help. But Minho, where exactly are we going? Somewhere my enemies can't find you. Somewhere I can keep you safe while I end this threat permanently. The safe house wasn't what Amara expected. She'd imagined something clinical and cold, a fortress designed for function rather than comfort. Instead, Minho brought them to a sprawling estate in the mountains outside Seoul, hidden behind gates and walls but beautiful in a way that took her breath away. Traditional Korean architecture blended with modern security, gardens that whispered peace, views that stretched for miles. It was a home, not a prison, and the distinction mattered more than she'd expected. Minho carried Naomi, while 2 of his female security guards helped Amara navigate the stone path to the main house. She was still weak from surgery, her body protesting every movement, but she refused a wheelchair because accepting that level of vulnerability felt like admitting defeat. Inside, the house was warm and lived in, nothing like the sterile penthouse where Minho usually conducted business. There were photographs on the walls, traditional art, furniture that looked comfortable rather than expensive. This is your place, she said, recognizing something personal in the details, not just a safe house. Your actual home. Minho's expression was unreadable as he settled Naomi into a crib that had appeared in the master bedroom with surprising speed. I bought it 3 years ago, right after we got married. I thought maybe someday we'd need a place away from the city, somewhere peaceful to raise a family. Then everything fell apart and I couldn't bring myself to sell it. He looked at her, vulnerability flickering across his features. I used to come here sometimes when the divorce was fresh. Sit in this room and imagine what might have been. Now you're here and it's real and I'm terrified I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream. Amara crossed to him slowly, her hand finding his. This is real. We're real. Whatever happens next, whatever threats are coming, we'll face them together. Minho pulled her close, careful of her incision, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the entire world through sheer force of will. I won't let anyone hurt you, he murmured against her hair. I won't let anyone take this away from us again. The conviction in his voice was absolute, the kind of certainty that came from a man who'd built an empire on keeping promises, no matter the cost. The first few days at the estate fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Minho worked from the study, managing his organization remotely while his men dealt with the threat Sunwoo and Marcus posed. Amara recovered from surgery, her body healing slowly but steadily, and learned to navigate motherhood with Naomi. They existed in a bubble separate from the violence brewing in Seoul, pretending for brief moments that they were just a normal family learning to be together. But reality had a way of intruding. On the 3rd night, Minho received a call that made his expression go dark and dangerous. He stepped onto the terrace to take it, his voice too low for Amara to hear, but she saw the way his shoulders tensed, the way his free hand curled into a fist. When he came back inside, he was different. The soft man who'd been changing diapers and singing Korean lullabies was gone, replaced by the Mafia boss who ruled Seoul's underworld. We need to talk, he said, his voice carefully controlled. It's about Marcus and what he's planning. Amara's stomach dropped. She settled Naomi in the crib and followed Minho to the study, closing the door behind them. The room was lined with monitors showing security feeds, Maps of Seoul marked with territories and rival organizations, the visual representation of Minho's empire. He pulled up a file on his laptop and turned the screen toward her. These are communications my people intercepted between Marcus and Sunwoo. Amara leaned forward to read, her blood going cold as she processed what she was seeing. Plans to kidnap her. Plans to use her as leverage against Minho. Plans that went into disturbing detail about how they'd hurt her to force his cooperation. He wants to destroy me, Minho said quietly. Sunwoo has been planning this for 5 years, waiting for the perfect opening. The divorce gave it to him. He found Marcus, learned about your history together, learned about the pregnancy before I did. The photos that destroyed our marriage. Sunwoo arranged them. Paid that woman to pose with me, doctored the images, made sure they reached you at exactly the right moment to cause maximum damage. He orchestrated everything because he knew the best way to hurt me was through you. Amara felt sick, her hand pressing against her stomach as if she could somehow protect the healing incision there. Why? Why would someone go to such lengths? Because I took everything from him when I cut him out of the organization. His money, his power, his reputation. He's been living in the shadows for 5 years, building alliances, waiting for revenge. And now he has it, or he thinks he does. Minho's expression was cold, calculating, the face of a man who'd survived countless attempts on his life and emerged stronger each time. But he made a mistake. He threatened my family, and that's something I can't forgive. Amara saw the violence in his eyes, the promise of retribution, and part of her was terrified while another part, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, was grateful. Grateful he was dangerous. Grateful he was ruthless. Grateful he was hers. What are you going to do? She asked, even though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Minho closed the laptop, his jaw set. I'm going to end this. Permanently. Sunwoo and Marcus both. They made this war and I'm going to finish it in the only way men like them understand. But first, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do, the things I'm going to order, the violence that's coming. It's not who I want to be. It's who I have to be to keep you safe. To keep Naomi safe. If that makes you hate me again, I'll live with it. But I won't apologize for protecting my family. I don't hate you, Amara said firmly. I'm terrified for you, terrified of losing you, but I don't hate you for doing what you have to do. She moved closer, taking his face in her hands. Just promise me you'll come back. Promise me you won't do something stupid and heroic that gets you killed. Naomi needs her father. I need my husband. Minho's eyes widened at the word husband. We're divorced, he said carefully, like he was afraid to hope. Are we? Amara's smile was soft, determined. A piece of paper doesn't change how I feel. It doesn't change the fact that you're the only man I've ever wanted, the only future I can imagine. So yes, Minho, you're my husband. You've always been my husband. The divorce was just a mistake we're going to fix. Minho kissed her with enough intensity to make her forget the pain of her healing body, forget the threats lurking in soul, forget everything except the feeling of his hands in her hair and his heart beating against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to marry you again, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Properly this time. With our daughter there, with your family there if you want them, with the whole world knowing you're mine. But first, I have to deal with Sunwoo and Marcus. And Amara, what I'm about to do, it's not going to be clean or pretty or anything you should be exposed to. Then don't tell me the details, she said simply. Do what you have to do and come home to us. That's all I ask. Minho pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt or fear. But all he saw was trust, absolute and unwavering, and it humbled him in ways violence never had. How did I get so lucky? He murmured, brushing his thumb across her cheek. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Amara agreed with a slight smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. Now go, handle this. And Minho, her voice dropped, becoming fierce. Make them regret ever touching what's yours. The operation happened fast and brutal, executed with the kind of precision that came from 15 years of ruling Seoul's underworld. Minho's men moved on Sunwoo's locations simultaneously, cutting off escape routes, eliminating allies, dismantling the network he'd built piece by piece. Minho personally led the team that went after Marcus, because some things required a direct touch, required sending a message that would echo through every rival organization in the city. They found Marcus in a warehouse near the docks, surrounded by hired muscle who scattered the moment they recognized Kang Minho's face. Marcus tried to run. They always tried to run. But Minho's men were faster. Better trained, more motivated because they knew what happened when you threatened the boss's family. They brought Marcus to his knees in the center of the warehouse, zip-tied and bleeding from a split lip where he'd tried to fight back. Minho approached slowly, his expensive shoes silent on the concrete floor, his presence filling the space with the kind of menace that made hardened criminals flinch. Marcus looked up at him with defiant eyes that couldn't quite hide the fear underneath. "You can't kill me," he spat. "I have connections, people who'll come for you if I disappear." Minho crouched in front of him, his expression cold and empty. "You threatened my wife, my daughter. You made plans to hurt them, to use them against me." His voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Do you really think your connections matter now? Do you think anyone in this city is stupid enough to start a war over you?" Marcus swallowed hard, his bravado cracking. "She was mine first, before you, before your money and your power. She loved me, and you stole her away." The delusion in his voice was almost impressive. "She was never yours," Minho said flatly. "You hurt her, controlled her, made her believe she was worth less than she was. I gave her freedom and respect and love. That's why she chose me. That's why even divorced, even apart, she's still mine and always will be." He stood, nodding to his men. "Make sure he understands what happens when you threaten my family. Then make sure no one ever finds him." Marcus's screams followed Minho out of the warehouse, echoing off steel walls, but he didn't look back. Some things required brutality. Some messages required blood. That was the reality of his world. Sunwoo was harder to find. He'd gone to ground the moment his network started falling apart, disappeared into one of the safe houses he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. But Minho had resources Sunwoo couldn't match, informants in every corner of Seoul, technology that could track digital ghosts. They found him 3 days after Marcus disappeared, holed up in an apartment in Itaewon with enough weapons to start a small war. The assault was surgical. Minho's tactical team breached the door at dawn, moving through the apartment with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. Sunwoo managed to get off 2 shots before they subdued him, both going wide, both desperate. When the smoke cleared, he was bleeding from a shoulder wound and cursing in Korean while Minho's men secured the scene. Minho entered the apartment once it was clear, stepping over debris and spent shell casings, his expression carved from stone. Sunwoo looked up at him with hate-filled eyes. "You think this ends anything? I'm not the only one who wants you dead. There are others. There will always be others." Minho pulled up a chair and sat, his posture relaxed despite the violence surrounding them. "You're right. There will always be others. That's the nature of power. But you made a mistake, Sunwoo. You made it personal. You went after my family, and that I can't allow." He leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to confess everything. Every detail of how you orchestrated the photos, how you found Marcus, how you planned to use my wife against me. You're going to record it all, and then you're going to disappear." "And if I refuse?" Sunwoo's voice was defiant, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "Then you die right here, right now, and I release evidence to every organization in Seoul that you've been skimming from all of them, not just me. They'll hunt down everyone you love, everyone you've ever cared about, and make examples of them. Your choice. Make it quick." Sunwoo's resistance crumbled. He confessed everything, his voice captured on video that would serve as insurance and proof. When he was done, when every detail had been documented, Minho stood and nodded to Youngmin. The usual arrangements. No one finds him. No one mourns him. Sunwoo's face went white, but he didn't beg. At least he had that much dignity. Minho returned to the estate as the sun was setting, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He'd spent 3 days dismantling threats, ending lives, doing the dark work that kept his empire secure. His hands were clean because he never touched the violence directly, but his conscience wasn't. It never was after operations like this. He found Amara in the nursery, rocking Naomi and singing softly in Ibo, the language of her grandmother. She looked up when he entered, her eyes searching his face for signs of harm. "You're okay?" she asked, the relief in her voice palpable. "You're home." "I'm home," he confirmed, crossing to them and wrapping his arms around both wife and daughter. "It's over. Sunwoo and Marcus won't hurt anyone again." Amara didn't ask for details. She simply leaned into him, trusting him to carry the weight of what he'd done. They stood like that for long minutes, breathing together, finding peace in proximity. Eventually, Naomi fell asleep and Amara placed her in the crib with the practiced care of new motherhood. When she turned back to Minho, her expression was serious. "We need to talk about the future, about what happens now that the threat is gone." "Now we rebuild," Minho said simply. "We fix our marriage, we raise our daughter. We find a way to balance my world with the life you deserve." Amara moved closer, her hands resting on his chest. "I want to marry you again, properly, with Naomi there, with witnesses, with vows that we both mean this time. But Minho, I need you to understand something. I can't live in constant fear. I can't spend every day wondering if someone's going to use me against you, if our daughter is going to grow up surrounded by violence. If we do this, if we make this work, things have to change." He knew she was right. He'd been thinking the same thing during the drive back from Seoul, during the quiet moments between violence when his mind had space to consider the future. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his hands settling on her waist. "Tell me what would make you feel safe and I'll make it happen." Amara took a breath, gathering courage. "I need you to start transitioning your business to something legitimate. Not overnight. I know that's impossible. But over time. Over years if necessary. I need to know that when Naomi is old enough to understand, her father isn't someone she has to be ashamed of." Minho was quiet for a long moment, processing the request. What she was asking would take years, would require careful maneuvering, would mean giving up the power he'd spent 15 years accumulating. But when he looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully, when he felt Amara's heartbeat under his palms, the choice was obvious. "I'll do it," he said, "not all at once. But I'll start moving my holdings to legitimate businesses. Real estate, tech, finance. Things that don't require violence to maintain. It'll take time and there will be challenges, but Amara, for you, for her, I'll become whoever I need to be." Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks. That's all I needed to hear. Not promises that you'll change overnight. Just promises that you're willing to try, that our family matters more than your empire. She pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like salt and hope and new beginnings. When they broke apart, Minho's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you," he said roughly. "More than power, more than my organization, more than anything I've ever built. You and Naomi, you're my legacy now. Everything else is just details." They were married again 6 weeks later in the garden of the mountain estate, surrounded by people who mattered. Selene stood as Amara's witness, crying openly as her best friend exchanged vows with the man she'd never stopped loving. Youngmin stood for Minho, her usually stern expression softened by genuine happiness for her boss. Naomi slept through most of the ceremony in her grandmother's arms, because Amara's mother had flown in from Nigeria specifically for this moment. Her initial suspicion of Minho gradually melting under his obvious devotion to her daughter and grandchild. The vows were simple but profound. Minho promised to love Amara through every challenge, to be the husband and father his family deserved, to choose them over empire every single day. Amara promised to trust him even when fear told her not to build a future together that honored both their pasts, to love him through transformation and growth, and whatever came next. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, when Minho kissed his bride with enough passion to make the small audience whistle and laugh, it felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. The reception was intimate and warm, nothing like the elaborate wedding they'd had the first time around. That wedding had been about appearances and impressing the right people and maintaining Minho's reputation. This one was about love, pure and simple, about celebrating a family that had survived separation and lies and violence to find their way back to each other. Minho danced with Amara under string lights in the garden, holding her close while music played and their daughter slept nearby. "This is perfect," Amara murmured against his chest. "This is everything I never knew I needed." 6 months later, life had settled into a new normal. Minho was systematically transitioning his holdings to legitimate businesses, using his considerable intelligence and ruthlessness to build legal empires instead of criminal ones. It was slower than violence but more sustainable, and he found unexpected satisfaction in building things that didn't require blood to maintain. Amara had started taking online classes, finishing the degree she'd abandoned years ago, finding purpose beyond motherhood, though Naomi remained her greatest joy. They'd moved into the mountain estate permanently, turning it into a real home with Naomi's toys scattered across expensive rugs and baby monitors in every room. One evening, after Naomi was asleep and the house was quiet, Amara found Minho on the terrace staring out at the mountains. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He covered her hands with his, holding her close. "I'm thinking about how close I came to losing everything. How if you hadn't called me that night, if I hadn't been there for Naomi's birth, I might have spent the rest of my life alone and angry and empty. I'm thinking about second chances, and how rare they are." "We almost didn't make it," Amara agreed softly. "So many times we almost lost each other completely. But we didn't. We fought our way back and now we have this." She pulled back, turning him to face her. "Minho, I need to tell you something." His expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is Naomi?" She laughed at his immediate protective instinct. "Everyone's fine, better than fine actually." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're pregnant again. I found out this morning. We're going to have another baby." Minho's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, joy, fear, excitement, all cycling in rapid succession. "Another baby," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "We're having another baby. Are you sure you're ready? After everything with Naomi, after the emergency surgery?" Amara smiled, seeing the worry in his eyes. "I'm sure. And this time you'll be there from the beginning. Every appointment, every milestone, everything we missed the first time." Minho dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against her stomach, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for loving me enough to build this life together." The second pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others. Easier because Minho was present for everything, driving her to appointments, reading pregnancy books with the same intensity he'd once applied to business strategy, preparing their home for another child. Harder because running after a toddler while pregnant was exhausting, and because morning sickness hit Amara harder this time around. But they navigated it together, Minho taking on more childcare duties, Amara accepting help instead of trying to do everything herself. When their son was born 7 months later, delivered without complications in the same hospital where Naomi had entered the world, Minho held him with tears streaming down his face. "He looks like you," Amara said, exhausted but glowing as she watched her husband cradle their son. Same nose, same serious expression. Minho laughed through his tears. "God help us if he inherits my stubbornness. Between him and Naomi, we're going to have our hands full." They named him Kwame after Amara's father, honoring the family that had shaped her while building a future that would shape him. 2 years later, the transformation was complete. Minho had successfully transitioned his empire from criminal enterprise to legitimate business empire. It had required years of careful maneuvering, of making deals and alliances, of slowly stepping back from the violence that had once defined his existence. He still commanded respect, still had power, but it came from money and influence rather than fear. Some of his old associates thought he'd gone soft. Minho didn't care. He had something more valuable than their respect. He had a family. Amara had finished her degree and started working from home as a consultant, using her language skills and cultural knowledge to help businesses navigate international markets. It was fulfilling work that let her contribute financially while still being present for their children. Naomi was 3 now. Bright and curious and showing signs of inheriting both her parents' stubbornness. Kwame was 2, quieter than his sister, but with an intensity of focus that reminded everyone of his father. Together, they filled the mountain estate with laughter and chaos, and the kind of joy Minho had never imagined possible. One evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Minho found Amara in their bedroom getting ready for bed. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, watching their reflection in the mirror. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your independence to marry a reformed criminal, raising your children in my world even though it's not what you planned?" Amara turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Not for a second. This life, this family, you. It's everything I never knew I was looking for. We've had our struggles. We've faced things that should have destroyed us, but we survived. More than survived, we thrived." Minho kissed her softly. "I love you. More now than when we first married. More tomorrow than today. Every day I wake up and choose you all over again." Amara smiled against his lips. That's all I ever wanted. Someone who chooses me, who fights for us, who believes love is worth the work. And you, Kang Minho, you've proven that every single day since you walked into that hospital room and refused to leave." He pulled her closer, grateful for second chances, grateful for the woman who'd saved him from himself, grateful for the family they'd built from the ashes of their broken first attempt. Years passed, and the life they built only grew stronger. Naomi started school and showed early signs of her father's business acumen, negotiating with other children with the kind of strategic thinking that made Minho both proud and slightly terrified. Kwame developed a love for art and music, his gentle nature balancing his sister's intensity. They grew up knowing their father had a complicated past, but seeing every day how he'd changed, how he'd chosen family over empire, how love had transformed him into someone worthy of their respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Minho took Amara back to the hospital where everything had changed. They stood in the hallway outside what had been room 317, holding hands like they had that first night when terror and hope had collided. "This is where it started," Amara said softly. "Where you came back into my life and refused to leave." Minho pulled her close. "This is where I became a father. Where I realized that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Where I decided I would do whatever it took to deserve a second chance." He kissed her temple. "Best phone call I ever received." They left the hospital and drove to the mountain estate where their children were being watched by Selene and Youngmin, an unlikely friendship that had formed over years of shared concern for the family. Inside, Naomi and Kwame were building an elaborate fort in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house. Minho watched them play and felt his chest tighten with emotion he still wasn't fully comfortable expressing. "This is what I was meant for," he said quietly. "Not running criminal empires or making enemies fear my name. This, being their father, being your husband, building something real instead of just surviving." Amara leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "You've built an amazing life for all of us. I'm proud of you, proud of the man you've become." The words meant more to him than any business success, any amount of money, any measure of power ever had. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Minho and Amara lay in bed talking about the future, about maybe having another child, about the business opportunities emerging in new markets, about growing old together and watching their grandchildren play in these same gardens. It was a future Minho had never imagined possible when he'd been Seoul's most dangerous man. But now, wrapped in Amara's arms with his children sleeping down the hall, he couldn't imagine wanting anything else. The phone that had rung at 3 in the morning 8 months after their divorce, the call that had brought him to the hospital, had changed everything. It had given him back his family. It had given him a second chance at love. It had given him a daughter and then a son and a future worth living for. Minho had spent 15 years building an empire of fear and violence. But in the end, the only empire that mattered was the one he'd built with Amara. An empire of love and trust and second chances. An empire that would last longer than any criminal organization because it was founded on something stronger than fear. It was founded on family. And that was worth more than all the power in Seoul. That was worth everything.